Hi, I'm Pastor Dick Stadler, and I'm here to do Talking Sunday readings with Ann Carter and with Father Chuck Carter. And we're doing the readings for Pentecost 19, the 19th Sunday after Pentecost. We're going to be looking at the Old Testament lesson from Exodus 32, and then we'll be looking at the epistle lesson from Philippians chapter 4. And in order to cover everything, we're going to cover verses 1 to 13. That'll cover both lectionaries that we sometimes follow. And then for the gospel, we'll be doing Matthew chapter 22, verses 1 to 14. So if we turn our attention to the Old Testament lesson in Exodus 32, this is the wonderful story of the golden calf.
A reading from Exodus. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a feast to the Lord." So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them, and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it, and sacrificed to it, and have said, 'These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.' I have seen these people," the Lord said to Moses, "and they are stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." But Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. "Lord," he said, "why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, 'It was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth'? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, 'I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever.' Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened."
And the reading only takes us to the first half of it. The exciting stuff follows in the part that you're not going to hear read in the church. So you want to maybe read this on your own in Exodus 32, okay? Or you can read it also in Deuteronomy 8, because at the end of the 40-year wandering, Moses retells the story in the history of Israel, and this is one of the episodes that he also reminds them of. And there's some interesting details in there that you don't find in the Exodus account. But just to give you the history, remember, God has miraculously delivered his people from slavery in Egypt. He hurled 10 plagues at Egypt and spared his people from the negative results of each of those plagues. Then as they're trying to get out of Egypt, Pharaoh changes his mind, sends his army after them to bring them back as slaves, and God delivers them by drowning the army of Pharaoh before they can capture the Israelites. And then as they begin their wilderness wandering, he gives them quail meat, so they got meat every night. He gives them manna, so they got food. And then he also at one point produces miraculously water from a rock so that they'll have drinking water. So you would think that this would convince them that God is on their side and God is with them and he's going to keep all of his promises. But Moses is now at Mount Sinai with them, and he goes up into the mountain to get the commands of God. And remember that last week when we saw the 10 commandments, God had said, here's what I want you to do. And one of the commandments said, don't make any other gods. Don't bow down and don't worship them. Will they be able to do that and be faithful? Because they all yell out loud, we will do this. We will obey this. Well, during the 40 days that Moses is up on the mount, we don't know when in that period, they get impatient. And so they come to Moses' brother Aaron, and who's the high priest, and they don't ask him. They demand, make for us gods who will go before us. What an insult to the God who had delivered them and had been going before them and promised he would keep going before them. And so at this point, all Aaron had to do as high priest to say, nuts to you guys. We just promised back there at the foot of Mount Sinai that we would follow all God's commands. And this is violating one of his first commands. And he doesn't. For some strange reason, he caves into them. Now, maybe he was trying to be clever. And he remembered that in Egypt, there were bulls. Apis was one of the deities. There were stories of gods who invisibly rode on bulls. And maybe he thought, okay, I'm going to sneak this one in on these people. They're really obstinate. They're really stiff-necked. We'll create a bull or a calf in this case because of the supply of gold that they brought. And we'll sneak in the remembrance of the invisible God who has brought them to this point, and we'll continue to get them there. Well, he intentionally collects all their gold earrings, and he then forms it into a calf. And what's interesting is that the language is very specific in the first part of chapter 32. He forms it the way a potter forms a vessel out of clay. Later, when Moses, his brother, challenges him why he did such a stupid thing, Aaron says, well, I collected all this gold from these people, and I threw it in the fire, and poof, out comes this calf, as if it was magic. And the question that you have to ask is, why doesn't God punish Aaron as the high priest for being so negligent in his duty to restrain the people? Well, God wants to hurt Aaron and punish him, but Moses here now is a type of Christ. He will go up and he will intercede for the people who have committed idolatry. He will also intercede for Aaron, we're told in Deuteronomy's account. And so this is a wonderful reminder of how Jesus operates as our intermediary, our go-between. And Moses reminds us of that. Well, as Moses now comes down from the mountain because God is furious and he warns him, go down there, these stiff-necked people, I'm going to destroy them all, and I'm going to start over with a new people, and you can be their leader. And Moses doesn't take that. He says, no, Lord, you have made promises that you're going to get these people to the promised land. Please spare them. But when Moses comes down and sees what's going on, he's furious, and he takes the 2 tablets of stone, smashes them on the foot of the mountain, and he goes in, and he takes the golden calf and he grinds it up into powder. And in the Deuteronomy account, it says like dust. It's really tiny nanoparticles. And what we're not told in the text, which you're not going to have a chance to hear read, is when you take nanoparticles of gold and throw it in the water supply and make people drink it, what's the chemical reaction that happens when you throw gold dust into water? We're not told in the text. But I read an article 40 years ago that alerted me to this by a professor. It turns the water red. It's called colloidal gold. And I've tested this now with a half a dozen chemists at 3M and other places, and it is true. Now, the text doesn't tell us this is what happened, but think of the vivid lesson this would be for the children of Israel who wanted a God, okay? And so they have to drink their God to begin with, all right? Because Moses requires them to take this water that's had the gold scattered in it and drink it. And the next day, where will their God be? In their toilet. And if it was tinted red, that would be a vivid visual reminder to them. This is your God. this is the thing you think is going to lead you anywhere. I am your God. And so now we don't get to hear that in the reading, but I just want to throw that in so you can reread that account yourself. Talk to other chemists and see if they think this is a possibility. But what a vivid visual lesson that would be if it really happened. So it's just a possibility, can't prove it. But anything else that you want to see about the golden calf that's worth people looking for?
Well, it's just fascinating to me how quickly the people can change their mind and how quickly Aaron, so in verse 4 and 5, Aaron declares of the molten calf, or excuse me, the people declare of the molten calf, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. It's that quickly. And then Aaron builds an altar for it.
Yeah.
And then Aaron makes a proclamation that tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. It's just all mixed up. It's just
I think that little detail that you mentioned is a good one, because I think that it reveals that Aaron is trying to be sneaky and deceptive, and that's not what the ministry is supposed to take place. You don't sneak people into the grace of God. You don't sneak people into the right behavior. You tell them what the Word of God says, and he just was negligent, guilty of malfeasance. So. Well, and thankfully, he had a brother who interceded for him.
That's true. Yeah. So it's fascinating just how quickly, after all they've been through.
But yeah, isn't that a good reminder to us, though, how quickly we can be great examples of Christianity, and then the next thing you know, the bottom falls out, and you're just embarrassed and you're humiliated, and the grace of God comes to us the way it came and rescued the children of Israel after their idolatry. Yeah. So.
What I think is fascinating too is that that God didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Moses went up and was meeting with him, but the smoke was still on the mountain. The people could still see it. And they still needed to have some sort of a visible representation, a physical something to see that was close to them. Mm-hmm. So whatever that says about human nature, what we have to have right in front of us.
I remember a church sign I saw, it was probably in front of a Baptist church. It said, "If God seems far away from you, who moved?" And I think this is a good reminder, and of what you're saying. That he's right there at the mountain, just smoking.
Just turn around and look.
Yeah. Okay. Why don't we move on to the epistle lesson in Philippians?
To Philippians.
A reading from Philippians. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, you whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, dear friends. I plead with Euodia, and I plead with Syntyche, to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you, my true companion, help these women, since they have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my co-workers whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through Him who gives me strength.
We're coming to the end of the book, and I wanted to remind all of our readers just what the city of Philippi was and what the congregation might have been like that lived in that city. Philippi is in on the northeast part of Greece. It's close to Macedonia. It was named after King Philip, who was the father of Alexander the Great. It's a very old city, even by first century standards. It's been around for many hundreds of years. It was after Philip founded the city, it was discovered that there were gold mines nearby, so the city was wealthy. It had plenty of employment opportunities, and the people who lived there were more than likely of a higher level, socioeconomic level. After Augustus became sole emperor after the civil wars with Mark Antony, he awarded land grants to his military. And so there was a contingent of people who lived in Philippi who were very loyal to the emperor because he had given them land and housing as a reward for all of their faithful service during all of his military campaigns. So the city, which was on the, and I always want to make sure I say this right, the Via Egnatian. It is the road that went across the northern part of Greece. It connected the Adriatic to the Aegean. The city was cosmopolitan, it was wealthy, it was very Roman. It was a hodgepodge, a mix, because so many people traveled that way and they stayed in Philippi. So when Paul speaks to these people, he is speaking to a group, presumably who know certainly Greek culture and Roman culture, and who are tempted in ways I don't know that even we in our society right now can quite understand. We certainly now still worship the gods of sex and love and sex and power and money, as they had physical representations of that in Philippi. I say all of this because one of my favorite passages in the Bible is here, and that's Philippians 4, verse 8. Whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. He's saying to a culture that is so bombarded with physical gratification and with materialism and with this cosmopolitan nature of seeing the world, step back from all of that and think about the things that make us good people, and think on those things. And with Christ, you can follow after those things. I think it's a challenge to us today not to look at the world and be afraid of it. Step back and think about the things that make the world better. Don't become so enamored with Facebook postings. Don't become so interested in Instagram accounts that you lose, because you can lose your focus on what really is good and what really is honorable, what it really is a better way to live. And I find that those are one of the last things that Paul said. Besides the classic that he said is, be content in all things. Be content. I've been rich, I've been poor, I've been sick, I've been tired, I've been healthy, I've been well-fed, I've been hungry. But with God, I have found contentment in all things. And he admonishes the people in Philippi and us today to do the same. Don't forget, as quickly as the Israelites forgot in the wilderness, don't forget where you come from. You come from a gracious God who gives you all. He gave himself, all of himself, and don't forget that.
I think computer techs have given us an insight that we can borrow here, They say garbage in, garbage out. You know,
Yes.
what you feel and what you're pointing to in that verse is we can intentionally either make ourselves more filled with garbage or more filled with honorable and pure and lovely things by focusing our minds on it. And that is something, as sinner saints, we've got two natures now. We can't just say the devil made me do it anymore. We've got a new nature that is can make conscious decisions to say, okay, I'm not going to look at that movie. I'm not going to watch those videos. I am going to fill my mind with things that are positive and so forth. In fact, I'm not going to listen to some of this political jabbering because all it does is make me angry. All it does is make my sinful nature get stirred up. And so we have a choice that we can make. And the power source he points to in verse 7, the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So if we keep reminding ourselves we are at peace with God because of what Jesus Christ has done for us, and keep filling that mind and heart with his presence, then he has his own way of transforming us and producing these things. Yeah.
When we listen too much of the political spectrum right now or of COVID-19, it fills us with fear.
Yeah.
And with fear, we react differently than we would if we were filled with the peace of Christ. You think clearly when you are filled with peace. You can accept truth when you are filled with peace. You're not so defensive. When you're afraid, your instinctive reaction is to lash out. Well, that's not what Paul is advising. So
if I can throw in one quick story that illustrates that very point. I visited a fellow in the hospital who, when I came into the room, said, I watched myself die today. And he had watched his heart monitor go flat, and he knew he had just died. And they came whipping into his room, of course, and hit him with the paddles and brought him back. But what's really memorable is that he said, you know, Pastor, I figured either way, I can't lose. If the Lord takes me, then I get to be with him right away. And if he leaves me here, then he's got something else for me to do. But either way, Pastor, I can't lose. And I think that's a good reminder for us in the midst of COVID and all the fears and all the anxieties and all the political haranguing going back and forth about how the other party is going to be the worst thing that ever happened, is that it can fill us with so much turmoil and fear that we forget that we have a peace that the world cannot give us. And that is through Jesus Christ. Yeah.
The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come. Then he sent some more servants and said, Tell those who have been invited that I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fatted cattle have been butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet. But they paid no attention, and went off, one to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his army, and destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. So go to the street corners, and invite to the banquet anyone you find. So the servants went out into the streets, and gathered all the people they could find, the bad as well as the good. And the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. He asked him, How did you get in here without wedding clothes, friend? The man was speechless. Then the king told the attendants, Tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Gospel?
So to Matthew and Chuck.
Well, we have kind of this note of peace, but here in this parable, we see kind of I'll tie it in here. The consequence for rejecting what God has to offer, rejecting that invitation that God gives to us. We have, following up from last week's gospel reading, a parable about the owner of the vineyard who sends his son, and they beat and kill the son. We have again another parable, this time about a king who gave a marriage feast for his son, and the word goes out, the invitation goes out, but all those whom the king invites, this isn't just some guy, this is the king, all those whom the king invites come up with excuses, and one made light of it and went off, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them. I mean, that's not just no, sorry, I can't come. That's, no, I really can't come. That's how dare you? How dare you even invite me, right? Well, in verse 7 it says that the king was angry. He sent his troops and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. And then he said to his servants, "The wedding is ready, but those invited were not worthy. And so go therefore and invite to the marriage feast as many as you find." Go to the thoroughfares. Go, just go wherever you can go and find people and invite them. And so they do. And they go out into the streets, and they gathered all whom they found, both bad and good. And so the wedding hall was filled with the guests. Now, of course, as Christians, we read that, and I think we can see in that, the eventual judgment that we see brought upon Jerusalem in AD 70, when literally the city of Jerusalem was destroyed and burned, and people there were slaughtered by the Romans. But then we see too then a picture of the invitation being extended out beyond just those whom the king initially called to the wedding supper at first. That is, the invitation now goes out to everybody. It goes out to the Gentiles as well, both the good and the bad, right? And then we have this interesting kind of second act to the parable in verses 11 through 14, that when the king came in to look at the guests, he saw there a man who had no wedding garment. And he said to him, "Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment?" And this man is speechless. And then the king said to the attendants, "Bind him hand and foot and cast him into the outer darkness. There men will weep and gnash their teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen." Now, this has always been a perplexing second act to this parable in my mind, because we do have such we worship a God of grace and Christ, who came into this world for the salvation of many, of all. But here we see that though there may be guests at this dinner who have made it in, yet there may be an aspect to them which doesn't quite check out, which is to say, which is the image that we get of the wedding garment. You can make it in, but you might not, quite exactly pass the inspection when it comes around. So I guess on my reading of this, I see that as kind of a foretaste of what Judgment Day might be like, or a sense of maybe an example, for instance, when we read in the book of Acts, Annas and Sapphira, who, though they were in the church, still didn't quite live into what it meant to be a Christian. And so it might put us on edge a little bit. And I think that's not a bad thing necessarily. Just as Paul said in last week, that he's continuing to strive to make make the goal of the heavenly call in Christ his own. I think we have here a sense in which obviously that though the invitation goes out to all, there's a sense in which we have to take that, not only accept that invitation, but take that invitation seriously and you know, put the wedding garment on, you know, come prepared, come dressed. So I don't know, I'll open it up to you and just see if there's other reflections on that that I might be missing here.
I have to say, when I was growing up in Sunday school, I hated this story because all of the Sunday school materials pictured this guy without the wedding garment in drab clothing of a street person, of a poor person, of indigent. And I think they're missing the whole point. We've learned from our study of ancient culture that many kings provided free of charge wedding garments for their wedding guests. This guy was arrogant. This guy wasn't poor. This guy wasn't coming with his own bad clothes. He was arrogant and said, I don't need the king's clothing. Don't you understand? My clothes are perfectly fine. And he's portraying the religious leaders who are so self-righteous that they don't think they need anything from Jesus. And so it really puts, I think that a little bit of knowledge really puts us in a great understanding of how God's righteousness works. He tells us through the Psalms, and he also says it in the New Testament, God has provided us the garment of righteousness. You've been clothed with Christ in your baptism, says Paul in Galatians. So here's a picture of a guy who was given everything. And notice when they invite the people, they invite the good and the bad, it says. Not just the goody two-shoes, but even the bad people who were dirty and unclean. They didn't have to worry about that because the king was going to provide them what they needed in order to be able to participate. And so once we understand that, and I think there's some confirmation of it, it really makes this one of my favorite stories in the Bible, because now I understand how this is resonating with the righteousness of Christ that is imputed to us, that makes us acceptable to God. And all God asks us to do is to, in humility, accept that we need it and then receive it. Yeah. So does that help?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And that's where a little bit of historical contextual knowledge can really kind of change the way you see a parable like this, one that is.
And I didn't know it in my early years of the ministry, so I'm older than you are, and so it took me a while to learn it. And so I'm glad I can pass that on to you, unless we get some viewer who's going to say, no, that's just a lot of mythology. But I don't think so. I think I've been able to confirm that there was this practice among monarchs of the ancient world. And so, wow, does that give this a tremendous gospel impact? Yeah.
And I would say, even if that weren't an historically correct thing, right? Theologically, that point about being clothed with Christ, I think, gets us to the same place.
Exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah. You're right. Absolutely.
So, well, very good. Well, I think with that, we can close this episode. Thank you for joining us this week for Talking Sunday Readings. As always, thanks to Tim behind the camera, editing and putting these videos together. Please leave a like, subscribe, and share these videos with any whom you think might benefit from them. And we'll see you next time for another episode of Talking Sunday Readings.